Richard Clifton. Richard Clifton died 1616, was an English Brownist minister at Scrooby, Nottinghamshire, and then in Amsterdam. Life. He is identified with the Richard Clifton who on 12 February 1585 was instituted to the vicarage of Marnham, near Newark, and on 11 July 1586 to the rectory of All Saints' Church, Babworth. The Separatist church in Nottinghamshire, which was probably Clifton's church, ordinarily met in William Brewster's house at Scrooby. John Robinson attached himself to Clifton's church, and was shortly afterwards chosen his assistant in the ministry, and after Clifton's move to the Netherlands became sole pastor of the church. William Bradford belonged to this congregation. Bradford had first encountered Clifton when he was in Scrooby. Clifton emigrated to Amsterdam in August 1608. He joined other exiles there, and attached himself to the church of which Francis Johnson was pastor. He was, perhaps, on Henry Ainsworth's departure 16 December 1610 made teacher among them. William Bradford describes him as a grave and fatherly old man when he left England, having a great white beard. Clifton died at Amsterdam on 20 May 1616, and is buried in the Zuider Kirk. He was also a member and leader of the Pilgrims. He led a congregation with William Brewster, Separatist pastor of Babworth's All Saints Parish Church, England. Under his teaching, the Pilgrim movement began, which would culminate in the sailing of the Pilgrims to America on the Mayflower. Pastor of young William Bradford, Clifton was one of the most effective authors for the Pilgrim Separatists. The church where he is buried has been deconsecrated and is now used by the city of Amsterdam as an exposition centre. The English Separatist congregation that became the core of the Pilgrim movement had two pastors. Neither saw the promised land of Plymouth Colony. The second pastor, John Robinson, was with the congregation although not yet pastor when they moved from England to Holland in search of religious freedom. He was a strong proponent of the group's later move from Holland to America, where they would re-establish their church in the new Plymouth Colony. When it was determined that only a minority of his congregation would voyage on the Mayflower, however, Robinson remained behind in Holland. He intended to make the Atlantic crossing with the rest of his flock as soon as it was financially possible. It was not to be. Robinson died in 1624 in Leyden, never having seen Plymouth Colony. John Robinson did, however, rejoice from afar in the founding of Plymouth, and even though they were separated by the Atlantic Ocean, Robinson in Leyden and that portion of his flock that had emigrated to Plymouth remained connected. The colonists continued to regard Robinson as their spiritual leader. His advice was sought and received by letter. Robinson's wisdom and flexibility, as reflected in the character of early Plymouth Colony, are widely regarded as significant elements in the colony's survival. Robinson's predecessor as pastor of the Pilgrim group is often overlooked. John Robinson was not, in fact, the founder of the original congregation. Instead, he joined a congregation that was already gathered around Richard Clifton. William Bradford describes how the Separatists in the area of England known today as Pilgrim country, Nottinghamshire, Lincolnshire, and Yorkshire formed themselves into two distinct churches. One was the church gathered at Gainsborough in Lincolnshire. John Smythe became their pastor. The other was the church gathered first at Babworth and then at Scrooby in Nottinghamshire, about 10 miles from Gainsborough. This Babworth/Scrooby congregation, which would eventually become the Pilgrim Church, was under the leadership of Richard Clifton. In one of these churches, Gainsborough, was Mr. John Smith, a man of able gifts and a good preacher, who afterwards was chosen their pastor, but these afterwards falling into some errors in the Low Countries, the Netherlands, there for the most part buried themselves and their names. But in this other church, Babworth/Scrooby, besides other worthy men, it was the preaching of Richard Clifton and the inspiration he provided to William Brewster and William Bradford that launched the Pilgrim adventure. Richard Clifton was born around 1553 near the Nottinghamshire village of Babworth, but left to attend Cambridge University, a hotbed of dissenting theology. He returned home and ordained minister in 1586, and was named pastor of Babworth's All Saints' Church. His position as pastor provided Clifton with a living, and he was now able to marry. He and his wife had 3 sons and 3 daughters, all born at Babworth. The 3 daughters died in infancy or childhood, but the 3 Clifton sons survived. Sometime in the 1590s, Clifton began to preach dissenting religious views and to conduct services using prayers that were not in the officially authorized Book of Prayers. He soon drew an audience from the surrounding towns and villages. William Brewster, living 6 or 7 miles away in Scrooby, heard Clifton preach. Brewster joined Clifton's Babworth congregation, walking by paths through the fields to attend services every Sunday morning and returning by foot to Scrooby late every Sunday afternoon. Several years later, around 1602, young William Bradford, who was living in Austerfield, a Yorkshire village some 10 miles from Babworth, also, according to Cotton Mather, came to enjoy Mr. Richard Clifton's illuminating ministry. The path from William Bradford's home in Austerfield to Richard Clifton's church in Babworth went by William Brewster's home in Scrooby. The 2 men, Bradford a lonely and intellectual teenager, and Brewster a settled older family man, walked together and undoubtedly learned each other's minds and characters. By Grizel. Works. At Amsterdam, Clifton was engaged in several bitter controversies. Having renounced the principles of rigid separation, he became one of the most violent adversaries of John Smythe, and published A Plea for Infants and Elder People Concerning Their Baptismy, or a process of the passages between Ion Smythe and Richard Clifton, Amsterdam, 1610. He also wrote an advertisement concerning a book lately published by Christopher Lawn and others, against the exiled English church at Amsterdam, 1612. The book attacked is the profane schism of the Brownists or separatists, with the impiety, dissensions, lewd and abominable vices of that impure sect, discovered 1612. Henry Ainsworth published an animadversion to Mr. Richard Clifton's advertisement, Amsterdam, 1613.